At the core of our mission is trying to seek out propaganda, right-wing misinformation, and doing our best to show as many people as we can that they're being lied to, and that they're being misled, and that they're being manipulated.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Chris Mosier of Progress, Texas, which is itself a nonprofit media platform that covers politics and government in the South's largest and most diverse state. Mosier is podcast director for Progress, Texas, and we talked about what it takes to give voice to the state's large and underrepresented political minority. He also described the chaos surrounding this summer's special sessions called by Texas Republicans to gerrymander congressional districts ahead of next year's elections. That's coming up. And in the arts and culture segment, we'll talk about the South's war on Halloween. But first, it's time for our news roundup. This week, how Florida sugar barons are cashing in on President Donald Trump, an Alabama charter school pulls back on its mission to serve LGBTQ students, and a Texas school district locks its libraries. First to Florida. A well-researched report in Forbes magazine last week looked at how the Trump administration's interest in pushing, quote, real sugar, unquote, as opposed to corn syrup, intersects with Trump's close personal and political relationship with the Fanjul brothers, giants on the Florida business landscape. Jose Pepe Fanjul and his brother Alfonso, or Alfie, are co-CEOs of Florida Crystals, one of the largest sugar companies in the country. They own the Domino sugar brand and are co-owners of one of the largest sugar refining companies. They're both in their 80s and are part of the generation of Cuban Americans who fled the Castro regime and settled in Florida in the late 1950s. The Fanjuls had also owned sugar companies in Cuba, and they used their knowledge of the industry to establish Florida Crystals, which has its headquarters in West Palm Beach. The sugar industry in the United States is directly supported by the federal government, which sets minimum prices for sugar and enforces tariffs and import quotas to hamper foreign competition. The Fanjuls have been adept at working the American political system, as the Forbes story recounts. They have courted and contributed heavily to both Republicans and Democrats. One anecdote in the article concerns a phone call from Alfonso to President Bill Clinton in the Oval Office, where he was allegedly in the middle of breaking off his affair with intern Monica Lewinsky. He nevertheless took the call from Alfie, who had been Florida co-chair of Clinton's 1992 campaign. Alfie was calling to complain about a new sugar tax proposed by then Vice President Al Gore to raise revenue for environmental restoration work in the Everglades. The phone call apparently worked. At least Clinton dropped his support for the idea. The Fanjuls, and Pepe in particular, already knew Trump before he was elected president. Pepe owns a house in Palm Beach near Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Pepe donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration committee and attended the swearing-in January. According to Forbes, Pepe has been a major factor in Trump's repeated insistence that American food companies, and especially the Atlanta-based Coca-Cola, should move away from corn syrup in their products and back to cane sugar. He apparently consulted Pepe on the issue and pressured Coke CEO James Quincy about it. The company responded, as many companies have, to Trump's browbeating, announcing in July that it would introduce a cane sugar-sweetened option in a classic 12-ounce bottle. Those started rolling out in a handful of cities last week, although it's unclear how widely available they will be. Health and nutrition experts generally say that cane sugar and corn syrup pose similar and significant health risks if consumed regularly in large quantities. And Coca-Cola is actually seeing its biggest growth these days in its diet category, specifically its sugar-free Coke Zero brand. But any increased access to the huge soft drink industry is good news for the sugar business. And that's not all Trump has done for the Fanjuls. Shortly after he took office, he lifted restrictions on the importation of sugar from a company in the Dominican Republic that the Fanjuls also own. The Biden administration had blocked the imports because of reports of labor abuses in the Dominican Republic, a chronic problem in the sugar industry overall. The Trump administration has also increased the federal loan rate for raw cane sugar from 19.75 cents a pound to 24 cents, effectively setting a higher floor for prices. These cozy arrangements have plenty of critics, and not only from the left. While labor and environmental groups have long decried the sugar industry's business practices, some conservatives and libertarians have assailed its government backing. In an article earlier this year for the far-right Heritage Foundation, the group that produced Project 2025, analyst Andrew Hale wrote that Trump should pull the plug on price supports that keep sugar much more expensive in the United States than in most of the world. The price of sugar in America is an average of 40 cents a pound, which is literally double the global average. That's actually one of the reasons that soft drink companies have tended to use corn syrup instead. But while Trump and his team are following much of the Heritage Foundation playbook, when it comes to sugar, it looks like the deals for the industry will remain pretty sweet. Sorry about that. A charter school opened outside Birmingham, Alabama in 2021 with a particular mission: to serve LGBTQ students in grades 6 through 12. The school, which goes by the name Magic City Acceptance Academy, is in Homewood, an affluent suburb of Birmingham. For those who might not know, Magic City is a nickname for Birmingham that came from its rapid growth and industrialization in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The school enrolls about 350 students. It is open to all local students, gay or straight, but by promising to focus on the needs of LGBTQ students, it has naturally attracted a number of them. Students told local media that they felt comfortable being themselves at the school and could take part in rituals like prom night without fear. But as the school's charter came up for renewal this year, the increasing turn on the right against LGBTQ rights has pushed it to make some changes. Speaking last week to the state's Public Charter School Commission, Principal Patton Furman assured commissioners that the school was in compliance with the 2024 state law against public entities endorsing vaguely defined divisive concepts around race and gender. That included repainting some of the school's decor and creating a broader context for its use of rainbow colors. Here's a bit of her testimony at that meeting.
We have had to do things like repaint in certain areas, right? And I'll just say the thing that, that we're all thinking. I'm just going to say the thing, and that is that we have had rainbows in our building because we are affirming to all people. And at some point, our mission was, it did include a segment that said we are affirming to LGBTQ people. We are still affirming to all people, but we have taken that out.
In an editorial last week in the Alabama Reflector, which is a state's newsroom outlet, editor Brian Lyman criticized what he called the, quote, state-sanctioned bigotry, unquote, that had forced the school to hide its true founding mission, essentially taking a step back into the closet. Lyman wrote, quote, 10 years ago, bigotry around sexual identity seemed to be dying. We could see a future where gender and orientation mattered as much as eye and hair color. We could imagine a nation free of the poison of closeted behavior and the trauma of forcing people to deny who they are. Today, Alabama makes it a crime to provide health care to transgender people. Lawmakers work every year to force LGBTQ plus communities out of public life. This is the environment the school faces. We live in a time where a small band of zealots want to beat Alabama into an either-or way of life, where conformity is all and individuality is a threat, unquote. Speaking of schools, this month the school board in the New Braunfels Independent School District in Texas voted to take an unusual step. It closed all of its middle and high school libraries to students. New Braunfels is a large suburb of San Antonio with a population of about 116,000 people. The school system has about 10,000 students. The library closures were in response to a new state law that passed this year, SB 13, which bans any material with indecent or profane content from school shelves. The law's language is broad and vague, and as in other states facing book ban legislation, different school districts are taking different approaches. According to news reports, some districts are complying with the law by letting librarians recommend books, with the school board having final say on which to keep. Others are taking the law's other option of forming councils, including parents, to review and approve library materials. But none seem to have gone as far as New Braunfels, where school board members insisted that they must shutter the libraries for grades 6 through 12 until all 50,000 titles on their shelves were properly evaluated. However, the decision to close the library sparked controversy and pushback from the community, with some people noting that the school board was denying public access to materials that had been purchased with public money. At a special called school board meeting last Thursday, October 23rd, parents and students argued for reopening, and the board ultimately agreed. The libraries will reopen Monday, October 27th, 2 weeks after they were shuttered. But the shelves won't be quite full. District officials said staff had flagged 81 books during the review for further consideration. Some are likely to be permanently removed from the district's collections. It is unlikely to be the last such fight, as districts across the state try to comply with the restrictive law. There also remains the possibility of a legal challenge. The ACLU of Texas has called SB 13, quote, unnecessary, unconstitutional, and unworkable. And speaking of Texas, now we're to my interview with Chris Mosier, podcast director for Progress Texas. The nonprofit media outlet was founded in 2011 alongside its funding partner, the Progress Texas Institute. Progress Texas itself is a 501c4 nonprofit, while the Institute, which does its fundraising, is a 501c3. It's a small operation with a big mandate to give voice to progressive ideas and spotlight progressive political leaders in the state. Its primary journalistic output are the podcasts by Mosier and his team, which they turn out in sometimes rapid-fire fashion as the state's turbulent politics necessitate. Mosier is a broadcaster by trade, a radio guy who came to more political work later in his career, as you'll hear in our conversation. We talked about Progress Texas, what it is and what it does, and also about the prospects for progress in Texas. As you'd expect from someone who does it for a living, he had a lot of smart things to say. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. So, Chris Mosier, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
I wanted to start by, I always like to kind of know people's backgrounds and the path that they've taken to the work they're doing now. And I know you grew up in Texas, and I think kind of right out of college got into broadcasting. You kind of talk me through your career arc a little, and then what brought you to the specific kind of broadcasting and podcasting that you're doing now.
I kind of took a little bit of a different path from that, the same components but different order. I started in radio right out of high school. I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, home of Buddy Holly, and not much else. Actually, there's quite a bit of art and music that comes out of Lubbock, but that's another conversation. Started doing, top 40 radio right out of school. I was more of a rock and roll person myself and quickly ended up at the rock station in Lubbock for a bit there. And I was also playing in heavy metal bands, actually.
All right.
So we decided we wanted to move our band to Austin in the early 90s. And so we all got here by 93. And I continued doing radio here as kind of a day job, which was sometimes a night job, depending on what the shift was at any given time. And have done radio really ever since, all the way up until, really up to the present day. During that time, I finally got my degree finished at Texas State. I was well into my late 20s by the time I got back to school, and had developed, had really always been interested in history and politics. I got a history degree with a minor in political science. Texas State University, which at the time was Southwest Texas State University, in spite of the fact that it's not in Southwest Texas. Don't ask me to explain that, but they changed that name to Texas State. But by that time, had begun to get serious about kind of understanding really how politics works, and also through the historical lens of how politics has meshed and morphed over long periods of time, especially in this country. And from there, I was kind of more of a political, kind of dabbler, just someone who was interested in it and tried to follow it. The election of Donald Trump in 2016, like many, many people, was for me a catalyst to get more involved in a direct sort of way. I started using my skills as a musician and knowing how to run live sound and also kind of internet skills to start to try to amplify the local clubs around Austin, starting with West Austin Democrats, which is my neighborhood club where I live. And moved from there. Eventually got involved with a podcast called Left in Texas podcast with a couple of guys who were much more deeply involved in Texas politics directly than I was. And so I learned a lot through that experience from JD and Joe. And from there, met the folks that run Progress Texas, started doing podcasting work with them, and it eventually became like an actual job. So that's kind of how I got from radio to political media.
So, yeah, can you tell me a little bit about Progress Texas? People in Texas probably familiar with it. People outside Texas probably less so. It strikes me as a really, like, it's filling an interesting niche because it's an unapologetically advocacy-oriented media outlet. But, you know, I would say you are doing real journalism. You're talking to the, you know, decision makers, and you're on a day-by-day basis. You produce a tremendous amount. You know, you're really kind of tracking things as they happen. So I guess, what do you how do you in your own mind think about what Progress Texas is in the media landscape?
If you'd asked me that question 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said we're the anti-Alex Jones. Alex Jones has sort of cratered since then, so we need a new, anti-metaphor really. But what we specialize in is spelling out and filling out and illuminating the progressive vision of what life could be like in Texas, highlighting what we support in terms of progressive policy, highlighting the people involved in Texas politics who are on the progressive side, generally Democrats, and getting to know those people and what they stand for and what they're about. We look to the Democratic lawmakers. They're all individual people and they all have their individual ins and outs, of course, and we've gotten to know a great many of them very, very well. Some of them we agree with more than others, but we've also learned, and really lately, that there's a broad variety of different types of progressives all across Texas. Texas is a gigantic state with a whole lot of different cultural diversity in the different parts of Texas, even within different parts of Texas. Urban versus rural is very different. South and east and west and north are all very different. And so we've learned that we can't expect all Texas Democrats to necessarily step in lockstep, as much as that might pain us on this issue or this vote or whatever. We've learned that it's harder to be a progressive or a Democrat than it is to be a Republican. Republicans are, more or less monochromatic in terms of what they're after and what they're about.
Especially these days, it seems like.
Absolutely. And so, on the progressive side, we're everybody. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make life good for everybody. And when you're in a political boat, that's hard to do because not everybody wants to row in the same direction, unlike our opposition. And so it's kind of a stacked game just by the nature of the game, just in what our side's about and what the other side is about. We have a harder pull. We have a heavier lift for sure.
And what kind of impact do you think Progress Texas makes? What do you hear from, just sort of like your average listeners or readers across the state? And then also what do you hear from elected officials or political or community leaders?
Well, from the public, we have seen enormous growth, both in our podcast products and our digital stuff. We have a terrific digital department that's done a great job with TikTok, of all things. Just a few years ago, if you'd asked me if I would be talking on TikTok, I'd say you're crazy. And I might not know what TikTok was at that time. But short form visual digital stuff, we've gotten really, really good at producing that stuff, and we see great success. We do a lot of stuff at live events, campaign announcements, rallies, things like that, where we've gotten very good at capturing live audio and video and packaging that in a whole bunch of different ways. We try to put our messages out in as many places as we can to reach as many people as we can. And the feedback, we of course we get lots of, blowback from folks who don't agree with what we're doing. But that actually, honestly, in most cases, pales in comparison to the people that we find who agree with us and who are maybe a little bit shocked that there are people who are actually saying these things out loud, sometimes. And so we feel like we're filling a void. If we weren't around, and we're by no means, there are other people doing great work. Texas Freedom Network is awesome. There aren't too many, getting back to what you said earlier, entities that are considering themselves at least quasi-journalistic, which we do. We kind of toe the line between commentary, journalism, opinion, entertainment. We cover a lot of that area in a kind of a broader sort of sense. But there aren't too many in Texas that are unapologetically left as we are. Tons that are unapologetically, you're right. They're everywhere. You got 3 or 4 of those in each major city and all through the rural areas. And every AM radio station in town or in the state is more or less doing right-wing radio, Rush Limbaugh style. So, we're weird in that case for sure, in that sort of context. But we don't, I don't feel like we're not super radical. We, at the core of our mission is the trying to seek out, propaganda, right-wing misinformation, and doing our best to show as many people as we can, that they're being lied to and that they're being misled and that they're being manipulated. We're not in the manipulation game. We're not trying to do psyops. We're not, we are not trying to sell anybody anything that we don't think is absolutely true. So there's not much, the only agenda we have is for, doing away with falsehood and doing away with all of that stuff. We're looking for, we're looking for kindness and fairness and equity, and diversity. DEI, we're all about DEI. I'll say that right out. We like DEI.
Well, Texas, incredibly diverse state. The fact that the primary voices we hear out of Texas at the political level are all conservative white guys. That's clearly not representing the whole scope of voices that are here.
And that's, and honestly, that makes me a little bit of a weirdo. I'm a 56-year-old straight married white man with 2 kids. They're almost out of college now. So I don't think I fit the mold of what a lot of people who are from perhaps a little bit of a distance, the way they, perceive of the American political left. I'm probably not the guy, but I grew up somewhat poor. I grew up in a situation where I benefited from government programs. I was a lunch ticket kid. I was taught, as a young kid to seek out fairness and to be a helper. I was watched a lot of Mr. Rogers when I was a kid. And definitely, had my fill or had my share when I was a kid of seeing inequity in the world. When you grow up in a conservative town like Lubbock, Texas, you begin to pick out, where these same types of, inequities have become just woven into regular life. And noticing how many people are just going along with it, as though this is the way things have always been. I've always been a person that I'm not into how things have always been. I want things to be better. Moving to Austin, Austin is very much a bubble, and we realize that. We live in a almost utopian sort of situation here that's quite different in just about every other place in Texas outside of the larger cities. And so, we're also in that lens. We're also in, recognizing that things are tough for people. Things are, even if they're not for us personally, or, we have a lot of people who work for PT and, a lot of different experiences. I don't want to speak for everybody, but, for me, I live in Central Austin. It's a wonderful place to live. But we have to constantly remind ourselves that we're fighting for people who don't have it as good as, for me personally, is the way I perceive that I have it. So,
well, and because you're trying to present voices from Texas as a whole, how do you go about doing that? Bringing in voices from, maybe more rural areas or more conservative areas?
we've done a lot more, really tapping into the efforts along that line that have been done by other people more so than doing them ourselves. We're a pretty lean operation. We're kind of, more so than, making things happen on our own. We're trying to reflect what the effort is like and trying to amplify those efforts for other people to inspire them to also join that effort. But this year, and over the last couple of years, a lot more, effort to kind of wake up the progressives out in the rural parts of Texas. We know they're out there. We've had recently, there's a group called the 134 Pack that are exactly that. They're itty bitty little county Democratic Party, operatives and, places where the Democratic Party has not really been active at all. And so a lot of those, the effort, that pack is faced with is getting out into those, parts of Texas with no Democratic presence whatsoever and trying to find those people and organize and activate those people. And that's not easy to do. So we've done some stuff with them. That's been great. We had Gary Morrow on just prior to last year's election, during which we learned a lot about how Democratic politics used to work in Texas, coordinated campaigns. You'd have people like Gary Morrow and Ann Richards and Mark White and on, folks like that, who would fan out across the state in a coordinated sort of chain sort of way, pulling all for the same team, not campaigning for themselves individually necessarily, but pulling for the team. And that's something that's kind of fallen by the wayside, especially as attention has really concentrated in the cities and away from the rural parts of Texas. So, I think most Democrats who understand their history would probably accept some of the blame that we have taken our foot off that base. And the reddening of rural Texas happened in part because there was no real organized alternative for a lot of those.
Nobody else was talking to them.
Exactly. So, a lot to it. We try to do as much as we can with other orgs, tons of partnerships with different orgs that we, respect and have a lot of fun with. Really love, doing live stuff. We throw the occasional live event. We have another one coming up in Houston here in a couple of weeks. We have staged things in San Antonio and Dallas and Austin, obviously. And looking to get out to some of those smaller towns, once we can manage it. We're fairly, lean, small operation.
Right. Yeah. I know what that's like.
Absolutely.
So kind of, on the relative scale of wandering hopelessly in the wilderness to on the verge of a major breakthrough, what's the status of progress in Texas, of progressive values and politicians in Texas? Is there momentum that you see anywhere, or is it all just kind of like scattered?
That's really hard. That's a hard question to answer. There are different stories and issues that come up. Really, our barometer for what you're asking tends to come in the responses that we get to different products that we throw out there. We have, a pretty, robust cast of characters that we, I wouldn't say we pick on them. I say we give them enough rope to hang themselves, whether that's our governor or attorney general or, many different folks in the legislature who will just serve us up stuff. And
the rogues gallery.
As it were, they're all fine people, I'm sure, personally, but, there, and back to that bubble, I think that it's no easy task for those of us who live in bigger cities and are surrounded by, like-minded people, to really understand how much progress is being made. We like to think we're making a lot of progress. We do see support and donations and contact from all over the state and all over the country. Really, we get lots of out-of-state stuff as well by people, who are digging what we're doing. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say exactly, how much progress we're making because of the nature of our opposition. They've got all sorts of media. They've got all sorts of money. They have tapped into religious networks. There's now there's an entire, Christian nationalist aspect to all of this stuff that's I was raised Catholic myself, I consider myself a Christian. So it's, we're up against, an opposition that has managed to manipulate their audience into, varying degrees of fanaticism, and that's a difficult thing to gauge from outside those circles in terms of, how deep is this? How serious is this? It's very hard. It's hard to say on a an objective sort of way. But we're going to keep on plugging, and we've done, really well with our numbers in terms of the attention that we get. We're, very happy with, the amount of, legitimacy we've established with the elected folks, with the lawmakers and, people at the party level, and, just about all the big cities and some of the smaller cities too. We're working on that. So we consider ourselves part of, the good fight, and, the good fight will continue. That's I don't think so much in terms of are we winning or are we making progress. I think of things in terms of are we doing the right thing, and 1,000% we're doing the right thing.
Well, so speaking of fights, obviously in the last few months, Texas was once again in the national spotlight. It often is, but over the whole redistricting battle, I'm curious how you all covered that, because as you say, you're a pretty small operation. This was national news, and not only was it national news, it wasn't only happening in Texas, because a bunch of the Democrats left and were elsewhere in Chicago and Boston. How did you approach that? Was that kind of an all hands on deck sort of situation?
I remember when it first started, there had been this conversation that the president was approaching Republicans in D.C. to ask them, hey, do you think we should redistrict Texas? And there was actually a fair amount of resistance from folks in D.C. thinking they had already gerrymandered Texas about as far as they could take it. There clearly were people working for the president who didn't agree with that and thought he could squeeze some more seats out. And so, it was a matter of weeks. It moved really quickly. That came down kind of towards the end of the regular session, as I recall. And then suddenly there was going to be a special session that happened to coincide with a terrible flood that we had on July 4. The flood was the excuse to fire up the session, but of course the maps were the first point of order, because that was what Trump wanted. And so, and it came down largely the way we thought it was going to, at least on the superficial level. We knew that they would be attacking black and brown districts in Houston and also in the Dallas area, but Austin got reshuffled. It was kind of a wholesale, reshuffling. As you know, there's a trial going on now in El Paso about not only about the current map, the one that we're talking about, but the prior map that they did in 2021 was also under review. So it's a legal mess. That's another part of all this is we can no longer really rely on the courts, because the courts have been very much drug into the magosphere, as it were, or many of them have. So there had early on been a lot of talk about breaking quorum, about stopping this thing in its tracks. How that was going to play out was kind of a mystery. They, as we have said, and as we believe, breaking quorum is not illegal. It's not something that's done really outside of the parliamentary process. It's something that, the minority has had this tool at their disposal since there have been Congresses and parliaments. And so, for them to do so is kind of, it's a desperate measure, but if it's the only measure you got, it's the one that you take. And so when they did it, we that was kind of actually a moment when we learned that we had developed a pretty sizable audience amongst the lawmakers, and especially the people who work for the lawmakers. We believe that a good chunk of our audience are people who work for state reps and state senators. So hi, all y'all, if you're listening to this. But so we found that we got a lot of yeses when we sent out interview requests to have people join us during that quorum break from Chicago or from Illinois or from wherever they had all ended up. And so we talked to a whole bunch of them. We saw a pretty massive spike in our numbers during that time. And also, as you mentioned, this became a national story. We think largely because the whole nation went, there must be something crazy happening if the entire Democratic delegation, or the vast majority of them, up and left their homes and their families and their jobs. We have a part-time legislature here. These people are,
threatened with arrest.
Oh yeah,
all sorts of things.
And yes, and the apoplectic nature of this was not the first quorum break. This has happened several times in Texas history, but there's never been this wild, hair on fire reaction from the attorney general and from the governor and on and on. And that was also, they want this really bad. That was the message that we got was, man, they want this really bad. And so, I worry that the narrative begins to take on a conspiratorial sort of flavor when you think about, why does Donald Trump want so badly to hang on to the House of Representatives in 2026? It's because he doesn't want the Epstein files to become public, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Not, outside of his agenda being stopped by investigations and by just the normal machinations of how our checks and balances are supposed to work in this country. We've got a government shutdown going on right now. We've got,
which they're now using as an excuse to not swear in the congressperson who would give them the number that they need to put that petition in, right? I mean, it's like, if it's not all a conspiracy, they're doing a good job of making it look like one.
Well, they're sure, as we're recording this, there's been this, what we see as a declaration of war from our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, against what he calls Antifa. And I can tell you, we're involved in multitudes of left-leaning organizations dealing in all sorts of different, kind of siloed issue areas, and some that are more general in nature, all sorts of elected officials, city, all the way up to state, all the way up to the federal level. There is no one operating under any flag called Antifa that I have ever met. To my knowledge, Antifa does not exist. Which is scary, because that becomes a catch-all. That becomes something that an attorney general with, all sorts of legal muscle behind him would be able to lay on you or me. And then it would be up to us to hire a lawyer and take time out of our day and defend ourselves. And so that's the scary part, is that, when you're talking about lawsuits and legal maneuvers as weapons, then we got a real issue. And I kind of feel like that's probably where this is going. He's going to find someone that he's going to be able to say, you're Antifa. And then it's going to be up to that person to defend themselves.
And even if actual charges aren't brought, just being under investigation can be a tremendous hassle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Loss of jobs, loss of whatever. I mean, it's really just, it's Twilight Zone. It's surreal for the top law enforcement officer authority in our state to be slinging these threats against Antifa, which, as I say, I don't think really exists, and then against transgender people. I'm also unaware of any, organized group of transgender people who are, organizing violence, or it's so weird. And it's like, I get it if you're Alex Jones. Alex Jones has been doing this stuff for years. This was his stock and trade.
Right here in Austin.
Absolutely. Started right here in Austin. But to have the actual state government doing these things, and we haven't even talked about the fact that they're sending troops into Chicago and want to send them into Portland. So there's no end of weird stuff happening right now.
So in addition to all of those things, what specifically, I thought I would kind of wrap up by talking, looking ahead to, 2025 had a lot of action. What are you all looking at in 2026? I assume you're probably going to be looking at those congressional races with the new map. What else is out there?
In Texas, it's primarily about the Senate. People seem to be very excited about James Tallarico. We have known Rep. Tallarico for a long time and have been following his progression for a long time.
Yeah, he's really gone. He's a viral star.
He's terrific. He's great with the socials, as the kids say, or the kids even say that. That's what I say. Yeah, he does a great job, and he speaks to, as I mentioned, people like me who have seen our Christian upbringing warped and into something that we don't recognize in terms of what the teachings of Jesus were supposed to be about. Rep. Tallarico, you may or may not know, dear listener, is he's a seminary student, Presbyterian seminary student himself. So he's an authority. He knows a lot. He knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. And he's a terrific, similar to what we've talked about with our mission at Progress Texas, is dragging the story back towards the truth and back towards what it's supposed to be. So we're real impressed with him, and don't take this as an endorsement. I'm personally a fan. We recognize that he's very, very popular. When we get Rep. Tallarico on camera, we can count on pretty big numbers, when we stick that stuff out into the world. So that's kind of the main thing. We'd love to see the Senate do well. We're waiting on the maps. We'll see what happens with the maps. There is we are reluctant to talk about dummy mandering, which would be the notion that the Republicans have overreached. One thing we have learned is that the Republicans are not stupid. The Republicans are very, very scientific and very surgical about what they do on a lot of different levels. And so when they make a move, we can pretty much count on that they're going to make that move pretty close to correctly. One thing we're counting on or thinking may happen is, especially in South Texas and especially amongst Latino voters across the state, that there may be an over-reliance on the notion that Latino voters who swung for Trump last year will translate into GOP loyalty coming up in 26. We don't think it's likely. We think there's a lot that's happened with the economy and with the immigration fight that is going to sour a lot of those voters away from Donald Trump. We've also seen, especially in South Texas, where people like Henry Cuellar have done very, very well at the same time that Trump did very well. And so we've learned that this is not party affiliation territory down there. It's very much more about people and about individual candidates. And so we'll see how that goes. And we plan to amplify as many great messages and as many messengers as we possibly can. That's the way we see our role, is to find the best of the progressive movement, all the best stuff that's out there, and drag it into the spotlight and throw more spotlight on it. That's what we try to do.
All right, great. Well, and people can find all of that at progresstexas.org.
That's right.
Certainly recommend following it if you're interested in what's going on in the second biggest state in the country, the biggest state in the South. I tell people that, what happens in Texas, as far as the rest of the South goes, does not stay in Texas, whether good, bad, or whatever. Like, we all kind of feel the impact of it.
University of Texas here, about probably half a mile from where we're sitting right now, they say what starts here changes the world. That's their motto. And so that's not always a good thing, we've learned.
Right.
Definitely. So, do check out our podcast. I do a daily every day. That's about an 8 to 10 minute kind of a rundown of what's happening right now, headlines, analysis, some snarky commentary, I'm sure. And then we do 1 or 2 longer form podcasts every week. So there's almost, on an average of about 7 to 8 new things hitting the feed.
Tons of great content.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
It's Halloween week, and I want to talk about a relatively new feature on the seasonal landscape. One set up as sort of an alternative to Halloween that has effectively become part of the holiday's ever-expanding customs. If you have been either a child or a parent in the South during the past 30 years, there's a good chance you know about trunk or treating. If not, well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. At your average trunk or treat event, a group of parents and community members will get together in a parking lot, most often a church, though not exclusively, and open their trunks to display candy and other goodies. Children come to the events in costume and make the rounds of the parking lot, collecting all the treats they can. There will often be games and other seasonal activities as well. And that's pretty much it. Then everybody gets in their cars and goes home. If you think that sounds a little lame, that it lacks the sense of mystery and adventure a kid can get from running through the dark with their friends dressed as a vampire or a superhero or a witch, being startled and delighted by lawn decorations or costumed hosts as they ring doorbell after doorbell, well, I agree. And that's by design. Trunk-or-treating was dreamed up essentially to take the edges off Halloween, especially for conservative religious families uncomfortable with the holiday's inextricable associations with supernatural forces and pre-Christian rituals. A 1994 article in the Birmingham News credits the origin of trunk-or-treat to Hilldale Baptist Church of Center Point, Alabama, a little northeast of Birmingham. Hilldale Baptist, by the way, no longer exists. It merged with another local church some years back. But their idea spread quickly among conservative congregations, especially across the South, and has been adopted by some civic groups too. It is often positioned as a safer version of trick-or-treating, protecting young children from being scared by or exposed to the holiday's spookier supernatural elements, and also from the assorted real or largely imagined dangers posed by everything from errant drivers, a real concern in areas without sidewalks, to poisoned candy, which is not, in fact, a thing that really happens. Up top, I somewhat jokingly referred to trunk-or-treating as the South's war on Halloween. But in practice, of course, it's less a substitute than an add-on. Many children do both trunk-or-treating and trick-or-treating. The trunk-or-treat organizers implicitly recognize this by mostly not scheduling their events on Halloween night itself. Around here, they mostly happen the weekend before, giving kids a chance to preview their costumes and score some extra candy to boot. Which, to bring the episode back full circle, probably makes the Fonhole brothers and their sugar empire very happy. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org.